Yes, I would.
All right over to you, Marisa.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Management Q's webinar series on the art of effective management. Today's session will provide a snapshot into HR fundamentals, one of my favorite topics. I'm Marisa Stoltes, your HROD executive expert, bringing you more than 25 years of experience, and I have the privilege of hosting this webinar series. Being an effective manager requires you to build a knowledge base so that you can attend to the day-to-day work and people challenges while mitigating business and personal liability within the legal landscape. Whether you're leading a small team or an entire organization, the fundamentals of HR are critical to help you manage effectively. This series is designed to share bits of knowledge, some tips, and a few tools that will help you navigate the complexities of management, enhance your team's performance, and drive organizational success. While the Art of Effective Management series is not a comprehensive training program, we will explore various functions of management, a few effective communication strategies, and some key decision-making points to inspire you and help you nurture a positive workplace culture. For today, we'll explore a more comprehensive approach to your role as manager while giving you a few key takeaways to apply right away on this very important topic. We value your insights and questions, so feel free to participate actively in the chat box. And now here's Dr. Myra Austin, CEO and founder of Management Q's, to walk us through today's management topic. Dr. Myra?
Thank you. Thank you, Marisa. And really, it's going to be, I think, more Marisa's show because she's going to have so much valuable HR feedback to bring to the table. But like any good manager should, I'm going to start with compliance. So just a reminder to our audience out there, this Management Q's webinar series is intended for informational purposes only. And what we mean by that is you're going to get some tidbits, you're going to get knowledge, insights. This particular session, you're going to get some legislation thrown at you to link up the concepts. And so we all come across different situations in the workplace. So by no means take this as specific legal guidance. If there is a situation that comes to mind or that you're currently going through that is brought up through our sessions, please make sure to escalate that appropriately. Talk to your HR leader or legal counsel to define the problem and resolve that on that end. Okay. All right. With that said, let's get into it. So really quick, I have over 2 decades of experience, specifically in operations. I am a management enthusiast. And so for our managers on the call, I love to champion you. I feel that you can make a difference in the workforce. And I have partnered with amazing executives like Marisa, who are HR leaders and have also navigated the workforce at every level, but from a different lens. And so Marisa, like me, has over 2 decades of experience and has seen it all, folks. So if there's a person to ask questions, this is your girl, especially in today's session. Okay. So today we're going to do an overview. We're going to break down HR fundamentals and what it should mean to you as a manager and what you should be looking for, whether you're a seasoned or junior manager. Knowing these things are the critical insights that take you from good to great. Okay. So it's these things that I see often miss in the workforce and make a huge difference once the managers have seen the light, right? Then we'll go through takeaways, we'll go through some resources, and we'll open it up for Q&A. So make sure to make use of that Q&A if there's anything that comes up in this session or has come up in the webinar series that you would like us to answer for you. Okay. All right, here we go. We're getting into the nitty gritty here. So what is the function of human resources in the workforce? So every manager, if they're going to be effective, should understand the roles that exist in their environment, what they're supposed to do, and how, as a manager, you're supposed to partner with them. Okay, so that's a different level of effectiveness just in concept, just in visualization and creating a lens for yourself that's going to help you navigate the workforce much faster and in a more effective way. So based on the human resources definition, okay, the HR department takes care of the organization's most valuable asset, its employees, and safeguards the business. So they have this two-prong. Oh, we have a chat already. Okay, let's see. Is the recording going to be shared afterwards? Absolutely, yes. We always share the recording and some tidbits as well, okay? So if you have to jump off, it's okay. We've got you covered, okay? All right. And so as facilitators, HR, as facilitators, no problem. As facilitators, HR work in partnership with management. And so HR professionals make sure that employees have everything that they need to function and perform the day-to-day tasks successfully, right? So a lot of the insight and the push and the advocacy actually has to come from the manager because you are the one who is directing. And I've heard Marisa say this a million times and it never gets old in my mind. Managers are the drivers, right? So if you're driving, you know who's in your car.
Yep.
You know who's on the front seat, you know who's in the back seat, you know what's in the trunk, right? So to make it simple, the manager really is the conduit in these environments. And so HR leaders are responsible for creating a healthy work environment that attracts and retains qualified people. So that's why they're facilitating, is because they have to ensure and partner as part of their facilitating role. So before I move on, this is your role, Marisa. Is there
Yeah.
anything you'd like to add, or that you've seen in your experience that managers should be aware of?
Managers, you cannot delegate employee relations issues, conflict, difficult, challenging situations to HR. HR will support you, coach you, teach you, provide you the programs, policies, and practices that you need, but you have to step into that role. You are the driver of the culture, of performance, and of communication up, down, and across. It's a huge role that you have, but HR is there to support you.
Right. Thank you. And we'll learn through this session. It's loaded with the reasoning behind why you're the driver and why it has to be you, right? It's not just them pushing it off. There's a very transactional and legal reason for it. And before we move on to the next slide, I will say when claims happen or litigation happens, it is you that they speak to, right? It is you that they investigate. And so because you had the closest relationship to the employee. So today we're going to dive into that a little bit more so that the managers on the call can see the connections. So HR and management. Okay, so HR fundamentals training should be part of onboarding every manager into a management role. So if you're sitting on the call today and you're thinking, I never got this kind of training, if you want to be effective, seek it out for yourself because it's going to benefit you and everybody around you.
Yep.
It's essential to management. You actually cannot manage effectively without understanding HR fundamentals because it falls under the staffing function of your role. Managers who have HR training as part of their transition into management will understand the different ways HR makes their lives easier and their careers more successful. So a lot of the times, because the roles aren't defined, because these things aren't explained, I see a lot of managers misuse the relationship with HR. I see them escalate too early. I see them not know how to respond to their team members. And part of it is this, it's the lack of understanding in this area. Managers will actively support an organization's success. So management, you are enabling success in your environment because you know what's happening and you know your people at the end of the day. Being knowledgeable about HR helps managers partner effectively with HR. So the only way we partner with somebody well is knowing what they're responsible for, what we're responsible for, and what we can tag team together. So when that knowledge isn't there, you tend to not do it. Or avoid it, or not know how to initiate a conversation, conflict resolution, progressive discipline, or corrective action, right? Those are example of things that we don't know how to step into because we don't know how to partner. The understanding of HR best practices benefits everybody. So it benefits you as a manager because you limit your own personal liability as well as the employer's liability, but you're also able to talk to employees in a confident and knowledgeable way. So that's the other thing that I see, right? Managers lack confidence, but it's because they just don't know what to do with the situation. And so getting training in this area really helps you be equipped and confident to navigate what becomes challenging situations. No doubt there. Managers will know that the entire HR function exists to encourage the company's success, and by extension, the success of every individual manager. So it's not until we understand their role in facilitation that we really know how successful we can be and what that looks like. HR in California, if we have California managers on the call, and I know we have some international and out of state that join us as well, HR in California is special. Okay. We are an incredibly litigious environment. I have made it my passion to be very in tune with employment law in California because I realized how relevant it was to my own success in helping managers and me myself managing situations effectively. It's important for you to know how to navigate. If you're the driver, you have to know where you're headed. You have to know what's coming up, right? Like you have to really understand and anticipate in order to prevent not only yourself from being in a problematic situation or losing your job, but playing the role that you're meant to play as a manager for the employer. Anything to add there, Marisa?
Just the word confidence, right? The more you know, the more confident you can be in doing your job. When you have that type of confidence, my goodness, it's a stress reliever, right? So if you don't have the information readily handleable, seek it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's equipping your tool belt, right? I like to coach the managers that report to me with I'm a very visual learner. And so I like to encourage those kinds of techniques when learning. Consider your tool belt. How much do you have on it, right? Are you equipped to take something on, or is your tool belt, it has one thing in there, right? And it makes you realize I'm not fully equipped, and maybe that's why I'm struggling. So here's another part of this, right? HR areas managers should master in the workplace. These are areas you should be very comfortable, very knowledgeable in, whether you're in California or not. But if you're in California, even more so because of the landscape, the legal environment is really tough. And there is personal liability that managers take on in California. So here are the areas that if you're not sure where to start, I'm telling you, this is where you start. This is the list you start with as a manager. And then I'll open it up to Marisa to see if she has any challenges on the list. But employee development, conflict resolution, hiring and firing, workplace safety, and now we have an extra component of workplace safety through legislation in California. Harassment and discrimination, progressive discipline or corrective action, complaint investigation, which is probably the biggest for me. I see a lot of managers don't know how to navigate an investigation properly, and it should start with them before it goes to HR. If you're wondering, that's how it should work. Documentation, compliance navigation, right? Compliance that applies to you and your role in your county and your state. Federal applies to all of us, but there are different layers. Employee handbook utilization and wage and hour handling. Is there anything, Marisa, that you see missing there that you think a manager should really get their hands around?
Yeah, I don't see anything missing here, but I don't want managers to stress over all of this too, because you're not hiring and firing people all the time. So,
Yeah.
you will get out of practice. Harassment and discrimination, there's training for that. Complaint investigation, again, it's not something you're going to do regularly, but there are things you need to know before you go to HR. So, just to go down this list, yes, these are important things for every manager to know. And don't let it stress you, because if you have the basics, if you know where to get the information, you're a step ahead of most people.
Yeah. And I think you should see it in terms of your career, not in terms of as soon as you get off this session, you're going to go and complete all the training, right? Don't do that. Don't do that. But you have a checklist you're working off. Maybe you learn something really well each year, because if you're going to stay in a management role, this is what's going to make you more effective, right? And this is what this webinar series is about what does effective management look like? And it's understanding and navigating these areas. So pick one for this year and learn about it, right? And then move on through your list. So the most common employment lawsuits. So the list that I just went through is complementary with the most common lawsuits or claims or litigation that we see, particularly in California, but these are pretty popular throughout the United States. So wage and hour, overtime, wrongful termination, discrimination, unpaid sales commissions, benefits, and whistleblower retaliation, right? So just recently, a case came across my desk, and I was reviewing it, and it had to do with whistleblower retaliation. It had to do with discrimination. It had to do with wrongful termination, all in one. And so this stuff comes up fairly often. And if the manager was aware of the handling, the resolution can come easily, right? Every business has to make tough decisions. That's not the issue. The issue is not knowing the law and navigating these conversations or interactions poorly. And the reality is that employees are much more savvy than they've ever been because of the internet, because of training so readily available, because education has shifted. So as managers, you can't be so naive as to think that your employee might know more than you do, right? So that's a very real thing in the environments that we work in. So that burden is on you through that role and function that you play. Anything to add, Marisa, on that end?
Wage and hour, like start there. If you know
Yeah.
nothing else, your role as a manager in ensuring time cards are correct, people are taking their breaks, lunches are taken care of. There's so many different aspects of that. You need to know that for sure.
Yeah. And again, you could take a look at these common areas where there's, an excess of lawsuits in it. Look up case law, and you'll have some sources in today's deck that you can actually Google everything, that's on these decks, and you can find more information on each of these areas. But knowing that these are the most popular, that's probably where your training should start. To Marisa's point, right? That's really what you should be the most concerned with, because there's a higher level of risk just with the volume of lawsuits alone, right? It's pointing to that for us. So here are some HR fundamental tips. So these are things that as managers, we should be doing so that we don't end up with these litigious interactions, and we don't lose our job over maybe mishandling or not knowing the law, right? So you want to communicate regularly with your team members. Just have dialogue around what's concerning them, what's happening, what their concern is. Stay organized, because when things get serious, that's when you start being asked for everything that you have on record.
Yes.
And I can tell you from having legal experience and working and managing law firms in my career, that one of the biggest things that comes up when a lawsuit comes up is that the employer doesn't have records and the manager has no documentation. And so I'll tell you, the first thing we asked for when I was working with the law firms was for the performance review and the employee handbook. So those are the two things you ask for first, typically, at least in my experience. And so if you're not knowledgeable or well-versed, that's where you're going to get caught up. Be firm when necessary. It's important to discipline. It's important to know your HR fundamentals, because if you fail to do so, it'll come up in discovery that you failed to take the right action. And that's where personal liability starts to come into play. Be open to feedback. If it's about you, if the issue is with you, listen. Don't take it personal. And I know that that's really hard because nobody likes to hear negative things about themselves. But your role as a manager is not to be liked. Your role as a manager is to function and to work and problem solve with people. That's your function, and that should be your primary objective. Because if you don't listen to the feedback and don't do something about it, that could be negligent too. You want to lead by example. So if you have rules, policies, protocols in place, make sure that you're following them too. Nothing sets you up for failure more than saying, do as I say, not as I do. It doesn't work great with raising children. It does not work in the workforce. It just never works. Okay. So just be very self-aware. Be as clear and as specific as possible when communicating with team members. Anything that's exchanged verbally, I recommend you document it and send it in an email to ensure that everything was clearly understood. Consider the bigger picture when it comes to team member interactions. Team members make mistakes, sometimes intentional, sometimes they take intentional action that's harmful. Sometimes It's a symptom of the environment that you're in. Regardless, consider that there's a bigger picture and never forget the role that you play as a manager in that environment, because that should supersede the smaller things. Document key discussions with employees around agreements, behavior, and performance. So if you're talking to the employee or addressing something verbally about agreements, anything you've agreed with them to do, behavior that needs to change, or behavior that you're acknowledging and it's a positive thing, it should still be documented. And performance, because if something happens in the future, for example, if the employee says, I was never acknowledged, I was never celebrated um, for my achievements, and I felt like I was being retaliated against. I mean, this is how these conversations and this communication unfolds. Then you would say, no, that's not quite true. I have these 3 examples on these 3 dates of me personally acknowledging your performance, right? So whether it's good or bad, you should be documenting as a manager. Okay. Marisa, anything to add there?
Yeah, just to expand on everything that Myra has just shared, it gets really tricky when we want to be everybody's friend. It gets really tricky when we're managing our friends or people that we were colleagues with at one point. You've got to step outside of that if you want to be an effective manager. And so, that requires some coaching. It requires a lot of courage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going to be important. If that's where you fall, acknowledge it, become aware, become self-aware, and then take action.
Yeah, and discipline it, folks. It's not about perfection. It's about gaining discipline and being a balanced leader and manager. That's really what's going to make you the most successful, right? Nobody's perfect. We all have feelings. We're not robots, the last I checked. And so we do the best we can, but the more knowledgeable that we are, the better we do it. And the more aware we are, the more cautious we are. And so we as a result, are better decision makers. So we're going to touch on California because it's such a unique employment law landscape. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you. Okay. So California, just to give you a sample, has 18 protected classes. So these are it, right? So wow. I mean, every time I look at it, and I look at it all the time, it blows me away every time, because I think, wow, these managers are up against so much. And the reality is that studies show that about 59% of the managers in the US have never had an introductory management training. And it's just such a heartbreaking moment for me, because I think yet we're held accountable and liable at times for understanding and knowing and navigating these areas. So it's important for you to educate yourself. I'm not going to read all of these because there's so many, but I'll pick a few out so you could see that things that maybe you didn't know before. And I would love in the chat, if you guys are open to participating, which of these classes are a class that maybe you didn't realize was a protected class in California. And it could be 1 or 2, or you could just say all. I'd love to get a gauge for the room, and what stands out to you, what surprises you. I can tell you that for me, national origin and how it's defined was something that popped out at me when it was added. And the reason it popped out at me was because of the interview process, and how we handle certain things when we're hiring is really what popped up to me. Disability, how disability is defined was huge for me, because there are accommodations, there's the ADA, there's all these other areas that are separate from this, but it work in tandem in the workforce. And so when you're a manager and don't know how to properly talk or speak or work around an accommodation, for example, that will set you up for discrimination claim, retaliation, potential whistleblower, depending on the situation. But you walk right into it. And it's partly because a lot of managers don't know that this is a protected area and you're supposed to navigate it in a very specific way. So the other one that stands out to me is leaves. The leaves in California, there are several different types of medical leaves or personal leaves. And so not knowing those, a manager can easily deny a request for an absence, not realizing they're violating or infringing on somebody's rights. And so that's a pretty big deal. And that is navigated in a very specific way as well. Anything to add there, Marisa?
No, It's big. You gotta
It's a
know
big
it.
deal. Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
very big deal. Okay, so I listed the source for you guys, so you guys are welcome to Google it. The list you can find at any and all times in the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. You'll find a lot of related legislation there too that really, is something that managers should be looking at. Okay. It's going to get more intense, guys. So, understanding the California employment law landscape in 2024. So, each year, the landscape changes. Okay. And so, that's the first point of awareness for our managers on the call. You should know that at the end of the year, you should be looking at what's going to change because that's going to dictate how you manage and what the employer is responsible for doing. So, you should know as a manager and use it as a competitive advantage. It's worked really well for me. Knowing these things, I was able to have, communication with my senior executive leaders before I got into an executive level position around what was coming. And so then I became a resource. And that's how you build some skin in the game, is because you're aware of things that most people are not. And it affects you no matter what, because you have to manage. So here's a little bit of what's coming in 2024 so that you guys can kind of connect the dots between what we've said so far. So there's going to be a continued increase in PAGA litigation. So if you don't know what PAGA is, start there because that is changing the landscape for what people are suing for. So it stands for the Labor Code Private Attorneys General Act. And what it does is it authorizes aggrieved employees to file lawsuits to recover civil penalties on behalf of themselves, other employees, and the state of California for labor code violations. How huge is that? Somebody can
Really
sue,
huge.
somebody could sue the
Mhm.
employer because they witnessed something being done wrong. It doesn't even have to be the person that actually had their rights violated. So it's important to know how to navigate this. And if you're curious and you want to learn more about PAGA,
We're
um,
running out of time, honey.
we're okay. I'll make it quick. If you could stay on a little longer, please do. I do want to be conscientious of your time, but we've got some really good stuff today. Cases must follow the requirements specified in Labor Code Section 2698-2699.5. The reason I'm sharing that is because you can Google all of that and see to what extent it would affect you, right? So those claims are increasing, and really it's going to touch on how claims are reimbursed, paid sick leaves for California Healthy Workplaces, Healthy Families Act. All of these areas are affected by this one change in the law. And so industry focused regulations will become more prevalent, which means that specific industrial, more than likely, or fast food chains, for example, will be hit with specific legislation that impacts them and how managers should manage their employees in those environments. So a good question for you as a manager is my specific industry tied to specific legislation?
Yep.
There's local jurisdictions that will continue to work on employment regulations, including increased paid sick leave and minimum wages. So that's going to change expectations for employees, right? So you want to know that that's coming, and how do I communicate with my employees around that? There's going to be an increase in criminal action brought in connection to labor code violations. So we just talked about PAGA and civil, right?
Mhm.
Penalties. Now the law is evolving because of what we've seen in the workforce in California, and you can be charged with a criminal lawsuit. So think about that as a manager, right? And it's not to scare you, it's to prepare you. That
Right.
training is that valuable that it could save your house, right? It could save you from going to jail if you're going to be sued for criminal negligence. And I always say this when I'm talking about legislation and management, not knowing, that's not a
It's
legal
not an
defense,
excuse. Yep.
right? The judge is not going to say, oh, you didn't know, it's okay to violate that person's rights. That's never going to happen, right?
Mhm.
Time rounding legislation is coming, more specific legislation around timekeeping and time cards. As managers, we manage all of that stuff. So you need to know how it's changing and what you can and cannot do. Okay. So how to get started as a manager. We're almost towards the end, but if you need to jump on, I get it at the 30-minute mark. Take an interest in your legal landscape, because ultimately you're responsible for upholding the law in your role. It'll be you who will have to testify. Okay.
Right.
Confirm if your employee handbook is updated. If it is not updated, confirm when it was last updated or when it will be, because that's your anchor. And that's going to be
yearly, right?
It should be yearly. It should be updated yearly, but that's also going to be your biggest anchor for defense. When a lawsuit or an employee claim comes up, if it's updated, you're covered because you have proof that this is what you're establishing in your organization. Schedule a meeting with your HR leader or department to do a quick review of what they're experiencing as a commonplace area of opportunity in the environment. So that means ask your HR leaders or department what they see routinely being a problem. Partner with them to fix it so that the business is not at risk, but you aren't either. Make a list of HR areas you need to work on, and we gave you some sample lists that you can use and start working on those as at your own pace. Start training and development your HR muscle ASAP. If you want to be effective as a manager, this has to be important to you. Okay, key takeaways. So these are our key takeaways for today. The function of HR as an organization is to support the company's greatest asset, employees, as well as safeguard the business. Strategic managers know how to partner with HR professionals to make the environment a productive one. Managers have a responsibility to keep their HR knowledge up to date. It is your burden, your individual burden. You can ask to be sponsored. You can ask your employer to help you with training. Absolutely. Some of it is employer required training. So that's another thing, but find your way, right? Find your way around these things. There are common areas of employment law that come up routinely in the workforce. Those are the areas managers should be the most well-versed in. So you have a roadmap of where to focus first and where to get started. Employee handbooks are an essential HR tool for managers in the workforce. An effective manager knows to keep an eye on whether the employer is compliant and plays an advocacy role when the employer is not compliant to help safeguard the business. I can't tell you, being that manager gives you a competitive advantage. You're a leader, no matter how you slice that cake, because you're covering so much ground with that awareness and that sense of urgency around it. California is extremely litigious, so California managers should understand the importance of being up to date and how it can affect them individually as well as collectively. Okay.
Yeah, if you don't know where to start, Dr. Myra, I would suggest that managers talk to their colleagues. What's going on? Like, as a team, sit down, have a conversation. What are you experiencing? What needs to be addressed? And that's a place to start in your particular business.
Yeah. And I'll say this, look for resources and don't be shy about it. We do sell a digital download that has the latest legislation updates from 23 to 24 on our website. Feel free to check those out. I worked on that to prepare managers. It also includes steps on how to prepare as a manager, and how to partner with HR, for example. But yeah, it's just such a critical thing. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Marisa, for our closeout.
Sure. So you got to listen up. There's something new coming. As we conclude today's session, I encourage you to take the insights that you've gained and apply them to your professional journey. The recording of this webinar, the deck, and maybe a surprise or two will be emailed to all participants for future reference. You can find additional resources, including planners and tools to support your ongoing development at managementcues.org. We'll continue the Art of Effective Management series on Wednesday of next week, March 20th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And we will have a special guest who's going to share the connection between neuroscience and performance management. You won't want to miss this upcoming session. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and stay updated on future events. Submit questions and/or share your feedback in those venues. Thank you for being part of the Art of Effective Management series. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye.